Welcome to the Destiny of Manufacturing podcast, powered by the Precision Metal Forming Association. I am your host, Dean Phillips, and I'm proud to be here today. With me, everybody put your hands together. Let's hear it for Nate Stansberry. Nate is here from, of course, from Rust Belt Recruiting, and where he is the managing partner. Nate, tell me right off the bat, what is your big takeaway that you see coming down the pike?
Well, Dean, first of all, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. We love talking about talent and we love manufacturing. And so I'm really excited to be here. I got to say, the big takeaway right now is the labor market. It's it's a tough labor market, no doubt about it. And the companies that really are going to focus on their processes as it relates to people are going to be the companies that are going to be set up for success, not only in the short term, but in the long term. And when we think about manufacturing in general, I mean, manufacturing companies do such a great job with continuous improvement, with, Kaizen, with lean manufacturing. I mean, every bone, right, of manufacturing is geared towards continuous improvement. And so at Rust Belt Recruiting, we believe that these tenets hold true specifically within your talent processes. And they probably haven't been reimagined in a very long time, or if at all, which is all right. When we think about how we kind of got here, because that's the question I often get. How did we get here? How did we get in this labor shortage? And to me, and I've been in this space for a little over 20 years. It goes back 40, it goes back 60, it goes back 80 years. When you think about manufacturing, you went to work where your neighbors went to work. You went to work where a parent went to work. You went to work, and work was the cornerstone of a community, of a small town. And when you think about the last 40 years, and I'm in Northeast Ohio, right? And so in Cleveland in particular, we've had economic decline over the last 40 years, right? I'm 42. So I'm coming into this kind of midway through, and those ties to the community, right? That covenant with the workforce locally, it eroded, right? Like if you knew you were going to work where your parent went to work or your neighbor, not only did you understand what was expected of you, but you were probably there on time because you knew you're going to get your butt kicked regardless if you weren't. You knew it was a good job. You had a sense of the community and the culture. And I'm not saying that, there's no one reason why, right? I'm not here to blame anybody, but when we think about what's changed, these pipelines have changed, right? So how do we recreate that? And that's really what we look to do, is recreate pipelines of talent within your company, within your community, that sustain long-term growth, that really achieve attracting the type of candidate you want, selecting the best candidate for the job, and then obviously integrating them not only for the short term, but for the long term. And I believe manufacturing has the best opportunities in these communities to this day. I mean, it's crazy. We see amazing, and I bet a lot of your followers, Dean, they're sitting there and they're looking at idle equipment, or they've got jobs that have gone unfilled. And these are good jobs. These are great jobs. These are high paying jobs. And they're probably sitting there thinking, where are the people, right? And so that's the challenge we've got today. That's the challenge we get up every single day and want to face. I'd mentioned before, a little bit about Rust Belt Recruiting, and I won't get too far into it. The niche we serve, and this just to kind of help contextualize some of my perspective on it, right? We are in roughly 40 individual environments, manufacturing mostly, a little bit construction, a little bit logistics, but let's call it 40 environments on any given year. And we put over 200 professionals to work in these environments. So that's roughly 4 to 6 really meaningful impacts to these companies, right? When we think about company size that we generally serve, it's it's usually not over 250, right? And that's because that's where we make the most impact as an organization. And so if there's listeners out there that this resonates with, maybe if your facility is part of a larger network, obviously, this will have some legs for you too. But ultimately, that's what we see. That's what we're working with, and that's the big take. It's time to focus on the people processes.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting that you bring that up, because one of the challenges that people that are doing, and I don't want to differentiate, but there is a clear line between people that are trying to do in-house recruiting,
Yeah.
going through the typical processes, and those that actually say, look, we need help. Number
Yeah.
one, we don't have the HR staff. Number two,
Right.
we don't have the expertise. And that really becomes a huge issue. So when you think about that, what if you were to think of something, what would it be that when you look at your client base, when you actually go and you communicate with somebody who's going to be potentially coming on board with you, what are
Yeah.
some of the things that you look for in a client, as well as that they're looking for in you?
Well, I mean, so from a client, when we look for, I want a client that's going to be open-minded, right? And what we don't want to leave a client with, to your point, right? Like, hey, you should put in a training and development person. You should put in a process that is just unrealistic, right? Like we don't want to be managing consultants. Ultimately, we want to help put together 3 or 4 well thought out action items to improve the talent acquisition process. We want to put some benchmarks in place, but what we want to do as a company is really run congruent with our recommendations. So we're there to fix those short-term talent needs, but there may be a handful of things along the way that we've identified with our years of experience saying, hey, here's kind of like what we see as a challenge. And we want clients that are open to that kind of feedback, right? Ultimately, we want to be with our clients for more than 6 months. I mean, we'd love to come in, do a heavy lift for you, get you over the hump. But 6 months from now, I want you to call me because you got a really hard to find search, not that you have a ton of needs, right? So ultimately, our goal when we take on a brand new client is to identify and share a roadmap for talent acquisition improvements, outcomes, and just to make sure that it lives in line with like a company's goals, budget, and their expectations, right? With some really clear KPIs or key performance indicators. That's success for us. That's what we look for. Because we're not trying to reinvent the wheel with these companies. Just like you said, Dean, like, hey, they may not have an HR person on staff or a recruiter on staff. They may not have the resources necessary. That's okay. We can work with you. And we want to talk to you about, okay, if you don't have a person here that's going to be in charge of all this, like, what do we have, right? Who is going to be our single point of contact? And, are our expectations realistic?
When you think about some of the impacts that are made by your firm and just in general recruiting, one of the challenges that I come across all the time is that people have to try and figure out what it is that is the reason that people either A, are not coming or not applying, or B, what is it that makes them not want to stay? Because that,
Right.
to me, is one of the biggest problems. Just to give you some numbers that I've come across when I've been dealing with manufacturing in the stamping industry, last year we had people that were hiring 10 people to get 1 to stay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the best case was 3 to 1, but 10 to 1, it was just ridiculous. And that's not only a cost to the company because of, hey, is this person going to show up? I have to put money in to train them, but it's it's more critical because of the expense that you're putting out there just to onboard an employee.
Absolutely.
What
And
what things can you suggest for people to try and be better at it? Do they need to understand themselves better?
well, I mean, when we think about, and you maybe you're paying an agency on top of that or an agency fee, you might have benefits coupled in there. You know, when you think about, you can run, hear me out. I've done this before. You can run high turnover. Okay. You can. You need to, if I identified an area, right? We show up to an environment and you're losing 9 out of 10. All right. Uh, I think that it's important to look inside. And how do you look inside? I mean, manufacturing environments, they're not necessarily always going to be the most open, right? Environments. I'm just straight up. So, take this for what it's worth. You got to get a pulse on your people somehow. One tool I've used in the past is, and again, this may not be appropriate for every single environment, but ask your team, anonymous survey, right? Like it's called an NPS score, Net Promoter Score. The question I ask, would you recommend somebody to work here? Because what you're going to run into a lot of times it is your best team members, right? Your absolute best team members, especially in a production environment. They're referrals, right? They're people that have been brought in by your best workers. And
Right.
so, you know, when I think about if I had that kind of issue, the first thing I would lean into was my workforce, right? And figure out what's working and what's not. And you send a little survey out. It says, hey, 1 through 10, would you recommend anybody to work here? And if you're having a high turnover problem, right? Like the people that are there are gonna tell you, an 8 or a 9. Hey, yeah, I'd recommend everybody here. A 1 or a 2, I'm already looking. And you start establishing some internal benchmarks around what that culture is kind of what it currently is, right? And how to start improving on that. Because one thing you'll also run into, like change begets change when it comes to people, right? Like if you're bringing in that many people, something's wrong. Something's wrong internally. And so you've got two choices, right? We accept the turnover, and in an accepting of the turnover environment, you have to have a elevation strategy that gets people from the entry point to the next level. So I've worked in companies, and they'll remain nameless. You can look me up on LinkedIn. The strategy was 200% turnover. That was the strategy. And what we did, and for a lot of different reasons I won't get into, and what we did is we would bring in a lot of people, take 90 days, figure out the best ones. And so we would funnel our efforts into highly trainable, simplified roles that we could just, people need to show up on time, ready to go. And then we would elevate from those pools, from those simplified roles into other spots of the company, right? And so that takes a degree of intentionality, but that is accepting the turnover. If we're not accepting the turnover because we just can't afford or sustain that kind of turn, would be my preference, figure out what's going on. Ask some questions. Get under the hood with your team. See what's happening, right? When we go to a client, I guess, and Dean, we can get back to that slide because we can kind of talk through it if you want, just the skosh, because I'd be happy to, I'll often talk to a client about where they want to be at the start of the year as it relates to hiring. Budget rules everything around us. So, what's the budget? What are your resources you want to come into, right? And honestly, are we ready to commit to this, right? And so these are questions you should be asking if you are an in-house, your internal HR team at the beginning of each quarter or beginning of each year, they should be asking these things, right? Like, where do you want to be, as a company? What's that budget specific to hiring we want to spend, right? And are we ready to commit to achieving this commitment? Means managing by data points. Commitment means putting budget dollars to work. Obviously, the feasibility, you're not going to, you will probably, if you have any disconnects between timing, budget, and I guess available personnel, you want to look in the mirror, make sure it's possible. And I'm always looking for one person to drive the effort internally. We're looking for retirements. I know a lot of companies right now are going through a bunch of retirements. I think that is understated in manufacturing, the amount of retirements happening. Your best people, they're probably moving on. How do we capture that before they leave, right? Man, it's almost like heresy, but do you take like your best tool and die maker or operator, or like a high level machinist who maybe getting close to retirement? Do you turn them into a trainer? Do you task them? They have to have the right personality for it, but do you task them to help bring up that younger generation? Those are things we really want to get to the root to, because those are the questions that are going to lead to some of the answers that I think a lot of companies are searching for right now.
If you had to look at it from a standpoint of as somebody who's looking for people and is challenged with the current situation, what is it that you have to be realistic of? Do you have to be realistic of, I'm going to have to train this person? Do I have to be realistic about the money? What are the challenges that you have to be? I mean, I know people are challenged, but what do you think on those?
So I think that you need to create a place that people want to come to. And that, I know it sounds, I'm going to come across very, I don't know, progressive, let's call it. But listen, hear me out on this. Every company has something unique to them. You need to identify what that is, and you lean into that hard. And specifically, if you're going to play heads up with Amazon, you're going to lose. You're going to play heads up with Walmart, you're going to lose. And you don't want to. Like, those are companies that they spend time, energy, they mine data. I think a lot of those jobs, I'll hear this on occasion, just hear me out. A lot of people will say, I got to compete with Starbucks, right? I got to compete with Target for this young talent, or any talent for that matter. Here's the thing with a Starbucks and a Target that I don't think people understand. You've been to a Starbucks, you've been to a Target, right? Those places, you understand what the interactions look like. A lot of people are looking for human interaction right now. I know there's a whole work from home movement and all this stuff still going on, but especially in an environment where we continue to kind of be quasi remote, people are looking for connection at work. And if you work in a manufacturing environment, and maybe you have a couple letters on your door, right? Not to call you out, Dean, but PMA, right? Like, let's say we're driving by PMA Incorporated, okay? Does the community know what that is? Do they know why they should work there? And as an employer, do you know your value? Do you know what's special about the place? I can tell you a client that I like working with, and they're in Euclid, Ohio. They give out turkeys at Thanksgiving. They take care of their team members. When people are sick, like, major illness type stuff, they raise money. They're family. They really are. I can tell you right now, when you harness some of these things that aren't just money, right? And you do need to adjust wages to meet the mark. And there's a you can benchmark wages. We can help you with that. It's out there, right? Like, you can look at how many applicants you get, how many are qualified, where they drop off, and that's a bit technical and a bit heady, right? But we can talk through it, right? There's an entire attraction funnel we can work through, and you can figure out where your fall offs are, right? That's kind of like those KPIs. But I would encourage a company, figure out what makes them unique, figure out what makes them special, advertise the heck out of that, make sure their company knows it's something where it doesn't matter of pride. Hey, even if it's a tough environment, hell yeah, it's a tough environment. We're tough people. We like it here. This is who we're looking for, because you want to attract or repel the
Right.
people you want in your company. And if it's a tough ass place to work, that's okay. You can have it be that. If it's, you got to make sure that, like, at the end of the day, it's appropriate. You're not going to get everybody, to apply for that. But like, you don't want everybody. You want the right person. And
Right.
so every company has a unique situation. Like Walmart or Amazon, for example, right? Like maybe you can do 410s. Maybe you can train people. Maybe you can have some flexibility elsewhere where you're going to be more competitive. And those are things you really need to look for, right? Because those big companies, they don't have that flexibility.
Right.
So
That's a good point, because I could tell you, I see the same thing. I've spoken to college campuses, and one of the things I always bring up, do you want to be a big fish in a little pond, or do you want to be a
right,
little fish in a big pond? Now, you go to work for a big company, you're going to be a little fish in a big pond, but the flexibility and the camaraderie and the ability
yeah,
to advance and develop, a small company has a lot of benefits in that, but you have to sell those to the workers. They have to understand
exactly.
that hey, I'm coming to work here because I want to develop, I want to get better, I want to do a lot of things. You probably are not going to be that person in a big company.
I totally agree. And so, from a recruiting standpoint, I think it's important too to kind of, because I think coming back around to like, all right, like we're never going to work with Rust Belt recruiting. So what could I leave you with, right? Like what facts could I just like say, hey, when we come into a place, here's what gets us excited. And I've worked in a lot of industrial environments, and I love to see a handful of low wage entry points that are simple to train and elevate from as part of the talent acquisition strategy. And when we say marketed, what we mean is if you can demonstrate advancement from these places, people are looking for growth, right? And so what you want to do is, like, if you've got a warehouse or you've got a quality role that is not super high tolerance, right? Or maybe you have a clerical role, right? And bring people into these areas, and then plan to elevate the ones you do want to keep, the ones that do show up, the ones that do ask questions, the ones that are smart, have the aptitude, looking for a chance, right? And then what you do from there is you market the heck out of that advancement internally, right? You demonstrate, hey, Mark just got a promotion. We're excited about his career growth. He's got a bright future here. Now you've created a promoter internally that's going to run with it, that feels empowered. The other team members are going to look, they're going to be like, yeah, Mark's only been here 6-8 months, but damn, he already got a raise. He's already learning new equipment. He's already got a foot in the door. And then when they go out to the community, what do you think they talk about at the holiday? Mark goes home and says, I just got a promotion. And all of Mark's friends hear about it. Mark's neighbors hear about it. And then all of a sudden, it's like, hey, Mark, what's going on at XYZ company? Are they hiring? And so bring us to like the second thing. I want 50% or more of your production workforce on referral. That means you have an all hands meeting. You say, hey, who found out about us through a friend, right? That either works here or worked here. Or just, word of mouth or something. Your clients are good referral sources, right? I know that seems a little tricky, but if you've got some really good clients, don't be, as long as they're not like, as long as you're not competing for talent, heads up, ask them for referrals. Tell them you're looking. Like, why wouldn't you share your growth
Right.
or opportunities with them? I think clients are an underused talent pipeline. Just tell them, hey, you've got a great vendor, you love them, you want to work with them. Like, tell them you're looking. They've got friends, they got family members, they've got people internal to refer your way. So what we're looking for, 50% referrals. Why? If you get everyone off of Zip or Indeed or all these other places, I hate to say it, they're more likely to go back to them when they have a bad day. And
Yeah.
I think that's probably understated and probably like, oh my God, like that's hair. Like, but for real, like when you think about the mobility of the workforce now, you could have a bad day or two, go home, click a couple buttons, and have an interview tomorrow.
Right.
That's the environment we're working in, right? And so you need something more that's going to root them in. You can every good talent strategy definitely should have job boards as a part of them, right? And all that, like that should go without saying. But if you're getting all of your people from job boards, they're destined to be, back on those boards eventually. One other thing I think is really important: make sure your website's good. Make sure you understand your digital presence. I know it's an afterthought. Hell, I'd say have nothing than have like a crazy website out there. Think of it as your digital lobby, right? Like, and it doesn't take much to put just a decent landing page together. But come on, it's 2023. Let's get a website, man.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Right.
And I'm not a millennial. I'm not I'm not that far down. I am a Gen
Right.
X person at the early end of it. And I'm a
Sure.
person who still goes to a website it's the first step I do
First
whenever I'm
thing.
evaluating anything, whether it's an
Yeah.
organization, a company, everything. And if
Right.
I go there and you have outdated information, or you have products you don't even have anymore, or you
Right.
have, no, not
Yeah.
interested.
Exactly.
And same goes true for when you're trying to recruit people. Believe me, they're going to look at your website.
Oh, for sure. Every time. Every time, right? Like every time. And I think that it's hard for, a manufacturing company that maybe hasn't had to compete digitally, right? Because, they've got really good contracts, they got vendors, they got relationships. The manufacturing sector is built on relationships and great products. So you haven't had to position yourself digitally before. And so, it's hard to even know where to start. And so, I get it, right? Same with people. Say, if you haven't really had to compete for talent before, um, this is, this is an area that, we can either say, hey, we need people, we don't know where to find them, and just kind of, or we can do something about it to change it.
Right.
And that's hopefully where Rust Belt comes in, um, for what
Yeah.
it's worth.
And how can people reach you, Nate?
They can go to rustbeltrecruiting.com. Right there, you're able to kind of see the markets we serve. Again, we're based in Northeast Ohio, but we serve the broader Great Lakes region, is how we describe it. And we love to help. The consultations are free. We have a variety. We're very flexible in how, whatever the project is. We try to make sure we only take on projects where we think we can deliver at a very high level, and then we try to turn you on to vendors that can support you if we can. That's, at the end of the day, it's a small community. We believe in the work, we believe in what we're doing, but you can find us at rustbeltrecruiting.com, or you can always shoot me an email, Nate S, as in Sam, at rustbeltrecruiting.com.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Dean, I appreciate the opportunity. Hey, thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day as well.
You too. Thank you, everybody, for listening in and watching if you're on one of the video formats. Thank you so much. Make it a great day.